All right. Good morning, good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our 6th IUC Alumni Talks. My name is Carlton, and I will get us started today. So yeah, please take a look at the slides. Everything is clear? How are we doing, everybody? Okay? All right, awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so today, we're going to start off with a quick introduction of the IUC Alumni Talks, as well as our speaker, Yannick Gayama. And then our moderator for the day, Sabrina, will be leading a quick 30-minute discussion. And finally, we'll have an interactive quiz about halfway through, so please have your smartphones ready. And then afterwards, we will also have a Q&A session. So throughout the talk, if you do have any questions that you would like to ask Yannick, please feel free to add those to the group chat here on Zoom. And we will be collecting those and preparing those. And then afterwards, we will have a group photo session, a quick screenshot. If you do not want to participate, please feel free to turn off your video at that point in time, as well as a wrap up. And then for those of you interested in staying with us, we'll be doing a little bit of a post-event breakout room, chance for you to speak with fellow alumni and even maybe chat with Yannick for a little bit as well. But yeah, that's the plan for today. So as I mentioned, we are a web series that, as you can see, works to build community in the alumni network for the University Center. Please, we actually now officially have recordings of our previous talks up on our YouTube page. We'll have links to that also later on, but please feel free to check those out. This is our organizing committee. The 4 of us have graduated from the center in the last few years, and then there's also Richard. He's our Dai Senpai and leads us fearlessly. We look forward to getting to know those of you. This maybe is your first time, or if this is your 6th, you're 6 for 6. Thank you so much for coming today. Just a bit of housekeeping real quick. Please, if you have not done so at this point in time, mute yourself. And then go to the participants tab, and next to your name, please add your graduating year for the IUC. If you are not an alumni of the IUC, you can leave your name as is, but please make sure that that is updated so we have a bit of context for who you are. All right, with that, I will pass the baton over to Sabrina.
Oh, thank you so much, Carlton, for that wonderful introduction. So today we have with us Yannick Gayama, who is the co-founder of the African Commerce Community in Japan, and he graduated. He graduated the IUC in 2019. Born from New York from a Chinese mother and a Congolese father, Yannick spent his formative years in the USA, Ethiopia, and Congo before he graduated high school in France and moved to Canada to study at the University of Montreal. And after obtaining a bachelor in communications and a graduate degree in game design, he enjoyed a decade-long career in PR, where he advised multinationals in strategic communications and stakeholder engagement. And he later embarked on a 3-year career change plan, which we're going to hear more about today, which brought him to Vancouver to complete a Master of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia, where he was introduced to the IUC. And he attended the program from 2018 to 2019 before resuming his career with a focus on Japan-Africa relations. So today, Yannick is actually calling in from Congo, where it's 1 a.m. now. It's the first time the IUC Alumni Talks has had someone join from Africa. Thank you so much, Yannick. It's great to hear that your work in Japan brings you to Africa and that you finally made it there after being grounded for nearly 2 years due to the pandemic. So could you tell us a little bit more about some of the Africa-related work that you're doing in Japan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the kind introduction. So yes, in terms of the work I'm doing right now, so essentially, so the AFCCJ that you mentioned previously, that's more of a kind of a startup thing that we have going on. But essentially, I would say 80% of my time goes to this consulting venture capital firm called Double Feather Partners. And so there, I'm essentially involved in a project that is mandated by JICA to start the first Japanese-led acceleration program in Africa. So we're starting this in Nairobi, Kenya, which is why I was there last week. First time meeting some partners after working together for months and months, which was a little bit strange, but I guess it's signs of the times. And so I do, in addition to that, I do a lot of like business development related to Japan-Africa relations. I'm also advisor at this specialized agency called Intermedia Japan, which was actually the first job I obtained after IUC, basically working with African embassies in Japan to help them promote investment in Africa or for collective diplomacy issues. And then the AFCCJ is kind of a spin-off of what I've been doing with the AFCC, with Intermedia Japan, where it started as the idea of creating a chamber of commerce for Africa and Japan, and then it just got a little bit, I would say, messy, political, and then we just decided to leave out the politics and just focus on the intention, which is to really drum up African investment in Japan. So the three hats that I'm wearing on my head, but I try to keep, try to stay sane, actually. So that kind of sums it up.
Wow, that's really fascinating, Yannick. You're certainly very involved in building Japan-Africa relations. When and how actually did you begin your personal journey with Japanese?
Yeah, so Japanese actually started when I was a kid, and I think like many gaijins, it starts with anime, games and things of that nature, except that when that happened, so I was born in New York, so I was used to, Inspector Gadget, He-Man, like all these American cartoons, and I loved them, like Ninja Turtles. And then I moved to Ethiopia. So my dad was ambassador there, and Ethiopia was the complete opposite of New York, right? So you think of New York, it's like the temple of capitalism, McDonald's and Oreos everywhere. And then you move to Ethiopia, which at the time was a communist dictatorship. So it couldn't be any, there isn't a greater opposition than that. So I moved there, and then there wasn't any TV. There was a national television, just one national television channel, and it started from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. And so in order for us to watch TV, we started exchanging tapes. So whenever our parents would travel, they would record television from abroad on VHS tapes, for those of you who remember. And then you had like long play, extra long play. And so they would record television for hours, including commercials and everything, and bring them back to Ethiopia. And then that's how we would watch TV. So I watched entire series of anime, just exchanging tapes with friends at school. And so I discovered anime and Japanese culture through these tapes. So I was watching Japanese anime in French. So I learned anime basically in French first. And then that's how I was exposed to Japan, and kind of bit me because I always wanted to know more about these characters, these strange uniforms that they wore at school, and why did they stand up, and when the teacher came in, I don't know, there was a lot of things I was curious about. So I think that's how it really started. But I wasn't able to learn Japanese because, mind you, that was, in the late 80s, so the internet wasn't there yet, at least not in Ethiopia. And I just couldn't Google, oh, I want to learn Japanese, and see all these tutorials, podcasts or whatever. So there was no way for me to really learn, and there were no Japanese schools in Ethiopia, and there weren't actually even Japanese books, to be quite honest. So so luckily, when I was I think a teenager, maybe 12, 13 years old, I had a Super Famicom, so Super Nintendo, and then people used to import a lot of games from Dubai, and Dubai had a lot of Japanese games for some reason, untranslated. And so I got this Super Famicom game it was called Captain Tsubasa 3, and it was all written in Japanese. It didn't understand anything, but I knew the name of the characters, and I knew basic actions like pass, shoot, and you could figure out what they were doing. And so you had these commands, and so it was all written in katakana and hiragana because there's no kanji at the time. Like, the technology wasn't advanced enough to display kanji. So I was able to figure out, how to read katakana and hiragana with that game. You know, I knew it was tsubasa, misaki. I was like, okay, sa. Okay, so that it was kind of figuring out. It was kind of like deciphering hieroglyphics at that time. Like, oh, I'm actually able to read this. So eventually, I was able to read hiragana and katakana without necessarily understanding the sentence, right? So you have tsubasa kun. I knew tsubasa. I didn't know what kun meant. I don't know if it was a preposition. I had no idea. But I knew that tsubasa was doing a pass because I could read tsubasa and pass. I was like, okay, I figured that out. So that's how I actually started learning Japanese. So I could read hiragana and katakana before I can even speak or understand sentences. And friends would call me over when they had a new Japanese game. Oh, can you please help us figure out the name of the character at least? I was like, yeah, I could do that. So it wasn't until university, actually, fast forward maybe like eight years, I'm sorry, what was this, 12? So yeah, maybe about 5 years later, I was able to, for the first time, receive Japanese instruction. And that's when I arrived in university. And I took official Japanese courses. I did so for I did 4 semesters of Japanese, basics 1, 2, intermediate 1 and 2. And even by then I couldn't speak. Like, you know, I did a speech contest. I lost it, but I think I was a finalist though. And that allowed me to go to Japan for the first time and do like a homestay for 3 months, and still couldn't speak a single word. And so yeah, so I did that for about 3 months, and then I could get into like the homestay. That's a whole other story. I won't take too much time with that, but it was a great experience. And so after that, those 3 months, I kind of went back to Canada and ticked it off my list. Like, okay, I've experienced Japan. I've been to Harajuku. I've been to all these places I always wanted to go to. And then, you know, what's next? I had to graduate university, and I knew that I didn't want to be a translator. I felt like it wouldn't be, I don't know, for some reason, I felt like having a degree in Japanese wouldn't do it for me. So I decided to give up on Japanese pretty much and say, okay, been there, done that, take it off the list and just move on with life. And yeah, and get over anime and games pretty much and grow up. That was the message in my mind. So, so I gave that up. And then for the next, you know, actually until the IUC, that's the part where I really started to relearn again. And it was a little bit difficult because there was an entry exam, and I know when I was at UBC, I owe this to Professor Christina Laffin, who actually encouraged me to apply and say, don't worry, just study before the exam and then you'll see what happens, and which I did. So thanks to the solid foundations I had back in university, back like it was like 15 years old now, I was able to dust up my Japanese and somehow get admitted to the IUC. And that was the transformative experience for me. So I think that kind of sums up my Japanese history there.
Oh, those are some amazing stories, very different times. Obviously very mentally agile person, Yannick, to be able to pick up Japanese from those video games. Yeah. Before the IUC, we understand that you were working with a PR firm. What happened there, and how did that whole stint lead you to actually your time at the IUC?
Yeah, so that was a particular time because, like I said, I ticked off Japanese off my list, and I was like, I thought I was done with it. And so I had my career just climbing the corporate ladder. At that point, I was a director at this global PR firm called Weber Shandwick. Things were going great, and I remember my boss calling me over and said, okay, let's discuss next year. You know, we want to make you vice president. It's going to be great. And do this, and that. And which would have been a very exciting moment. I think anyone who has like a corporate dream is actually working for those kind of moments. And I remember going home and feeling empty. I was like, well, I'm not excited by this. This doesn't make me happy. So, you know, what's wrong, you know? So I knew I had to change something. Something wasn't right. And and then I started entering these existential questions like, you know, what am I going to do with my life? What's the meaning of life? And, you know, all these things, and worst questions possible you can ask yourself, by the way, because they're just too general. You know, you just get lost in thought and enter these dimensions. But I think it's so for me, you know, things really started changing when I changed my research question, you know, from, you know, what am I going to do with my life to, you what are the causes I want to defend, or what are the issues that I want to move forward, so that I can actually contribute to something. Because I felt like maybe that part was missing. I felt like my contribution wasn't enough. I was making clients happy. I was promoting products, goods, ideas, all those things which matter. But in my view, I wanted to contribute differently to the world in a more meaningful way. And that's how the whole idea of getting involved in Japan-Africa relations came about. But it was mostly so the overarching reflection was, what I really wanted to contribute to. And me being from Africa, I felt that there was the relationship that Africa has with the Western world, it can be defined by, key moments, whether it's slavery or colonization. And that has led to a certain type of relationship that Africa has with the world. And I was looking at how China was engaging with Africa and how that made a difference. Not to say that the relationship between China and Africa is perfect, just to say that it's different. And it's because of that difference that many Africans realized today that there was another way. There were different partners that we could deal with, and it could unlock so many things. If there's one benefit that China has had on Africa, is just showing that there's a different way to, engage. So that's how I realized, okay, I really want to push the needle a little bit more towards Asia and make sure that Africa has at least more options when it comes to partners, more options when it comes to governance models. There's so many things that we're doing in Africa that have been imposed to us. Even the presidential system, for example. In Africa, we have forms of governance that have been ignored. Traditional forms of governance that really resemble the way we deal with issues. But all this is just swept aside to impose a presidential system that comes straight from colonization, and that leads to internal conflict because we're not used to having presidents, we're used to having councils, tribal councils, So things like that. So whenever we're exposed to new things, new results could happen, new outcomes could happen. So knowing that, I said, okay, I really want to include more Asia. So looking at Africa and Asia, I saw that obviously for me, being half Chinese, maybe China would have been the most evident, route to pursue. But I sensed that China did not have particular issues. The Chinese aren't afraid of anything. They'll move to Africa. They'll set up shop and then they'll speak Lingala in like 6 months and then start trading with you. They're not afraid of this, and that's not Japanese. So I saw that the relationship with Japan had a lot more challenges and a lot more opportunities too, which is why I decided to, look into that. And it kind of sparked this love for Japan that I'd tried to really quell down and make disappear just to become, serious or an adult or whatever how you want to frame it. But it really connected both now, because now I would be going to Japan for business reasons, not for tourism or anime or things of that nature. So it really rekindled my love for Japanese, my passion. And so I had to figure out how I would go to Japan. And so at the time, so I decided, I really thought long and hard about it. And that's when I had this 3-year career change plan that included a 2-year stint in Vancouver, where I would go back to university to do a second master's in public policy and global affairs. And that was a way for me to kind of, the same way you update your phones and laptops every day. So I had to update my firmware and decided to go to university, and being surrounded by so many younger students was a great way to catch up and, revitalize a little bit myself and my brain. And that was an amazing experience. And moving to Vancouver was also strategic because that's Canada's gateway to the Pacific. So I didn't know how to go to Japan, but I knew that if I moved to Vancouver, the odds of meeting someone who would know a way to go there would increase significantly. And that's what happened. So I went to UBC, met Professor Christina Laffin, who told me about the IUC and how they were trying to find candidates who really want to use Japanese for professional reasons. And at first I thought, I don't want to do a PhD. There might be too many academics. No, just apply. And I applied, and that's how I ended up, getting into the program and going through 10 months of torture, and then, being able to actually speak some business Japanese and do what I'd set out to do. So yeah, so that's how like the 3-year career change plan. And just when the program ended, that's when I started working. So it was really great.
That's such an exciting turn of events. And the IUC was very lucky that you ended up in their hands. So
I was the lucky one here.
Oh yeah, I think both were lucky. What was IUC life like for you? You attended from 2018 to 19, right?
Yeah. It was amazing when I look back. Because I feel like when you reach a certain age, you start doing things with a sense of purpose, and I really had that sense of purpose in me. Like I really wanted to study for a specific objective, so I knew why I was there. I knew what I wanted to achieve. So I would say I was very focused. Unfortunately, I wasn't as advanced. My Japanese was not only rusty, but 4 semesters is obviously not enough to really perfect any language. So I was fortunate to be surrounded by so many amazing students, which I was not competing with. I was just trying to learn from them and say, okay, oh, this is how he said that. She said it like this, or just silently observing people and just trying to repeat certain sentences that I thought were cool. And anyone at IUC will tell you, like I was always sitting at the same spot. Like I had a spot there. If you were looking for me, I was there. It's kind of like these weird RPGs where there's always a character at one specific place. You know where to find him. I was that guy. So for me, it was challenging at first because I had a lot of doubts, obviously coming in because of my level of Japanese, and I did like the end this test that we have, and you have this chart. My chart didn't look great. Actually, my chart after that didn't look great either, but there was some progress, and I think that's the key element that I was looking for, making sure that I was competing with myself and make sure that I improved myself rather than relative to others, right? So the experience at the IUC for me was very interesting because I was focused, but at the same time I was working, and that was because of some kind of issue where in between UBC and IUC, I had a few months open, and I decided to help a friend on a PR contract, which was supposed to end in 3 months, did not. The client just completely changed her mind and then had to redo the whole thing. So I was actually working while at IUC, which was not recommended, but I did it anyways. And because I was locked in this contract, I didn't want to tell my friend just, okay, sorry, I can't help you. So it was challenging in terms of time. The homework was killer. So I was sleeping at 1, 2 a.m. Just to do the homework so I could make sure that Ohashi Sensei wouldn't be disappointed in me the next day. But the quizzes were difficult though, because all the things that you had to learn by heart, I couldn't do that. I just simply had the time to make the reps and then just be able to blurt things out on call. So I was focusing more on learning the Japanese from a emotional standpoint. So I would try to think about, I could speak English and French. When I switch these languages, I don't think about the words. I don't have to memorize words. It's really about when I feel hungry, the words come out and I don't think about it. So I was trying to make these emotional connections with Japanese so that I could be able to speak more spontaneously. When I was tired, instead of saying I'm tired, I would use a tsukareteru, like I would use Japanese words. And that helped me a lot actually through the IUC to be able to keep up with the many students who were just killing it, right? So yeah, but overall, I don't miss a single thing. Sometimes I think about going back and say, should I go back? And I'm like, no, that's probably a terrible idea. But I don't think I could survive another 10 months. But yeah, but overall, it was amazing.
Yeah, we've all been there. I'm so amazed that so many of us survived. And I really like what you said about building an emotional connection with Japanese, the way you phrased it. So we also know that we have heard a little bit about how you not only were working while you're at the IUC, but also attending like every single Africa related event that you could find. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so that was part of the 3-year plan. So just figuring out what to do after IUC, and I think we had these business Japanese sessions, so that already put us in the mindset of thinking about what you're going to do professionally with your Japanese. I already had an idea in mind. So even before the program ended, I think the second portion of the program, that's when I started networking already, because I knew I was here to work. And so I went to every single Africa related event. It could be fashion, food, a simple dance event, anything. I just attended. And the goal wasn't necessarily to enjoy the spectacle and the food and all that, but was to figure out who are the organizers. Because the organizers are the people working behind the scenes, and if they probably know people in the area, whether it's sponsors or patrons, whoever it is. So I went to all these events, started networking like crazy, and eventually, I think maybe 2 months before the end of the program, I attended this event called Imano Africa. It was in Yokohama, actually, at the around the red brick warehouse. And then I went there with the mission, like, okay, I want to. It was a great event because all the embassies were represented. They all had booths. There were even members of the imperial family that came over. Some ministers from the government of Japan. I was like, okay, this is the real deal. Who is behind this? And then I was started approaching everyone who had like a walkie-talkie or things like that. Like, hey, who do you work for? And so eventually I bumped into this young lady. Then she said, yeah, no, it's actually this woman over there. And she pointed at this lady who was French. And I was like, oh, it's a French lady behind all this. This was strange. And luckily I could speak French. And she hadn't spoken French in a long time. And so I went over and just started networking. Hey, hello, this is a great event. Congratulations. And then I started talking to her about the reason why I was here, what I was trying to do, the idea of the Chamber of Commerce. And then she was like, wait a minute, you said Chamber of Commerce? Well, it turns out that we submitted a project last week to the African Diplomatic Corps in Japan about this Chamber of Commerce. So would you be interested? And then before she finished her sentence, I said yes. And so then so that at least part was done. And I can't emphasize enough how networking is important. And it doesn't mean that you have to network with the sense of purpose. I think that makes a huge difference. At least you know which events to attend and what questions to ask. And it's more about, it's less about talking about yourself, but asking questions, right? Usually something we tell ourselves like, what will I say and stuff like that, but just be focused on things, on questions and what you want to know. And then talking about yourself is easy. You can do it in your sleep, right? But it's really about asking the right questions. So the whole networking part was essential for me transitioning from studying Japanese to actually working, being able to use it in a professional setting.
That's a really inspiring story. So many of these episodes that you shared are really movie worthy, I think.
Well, I'm trying not to go into tangents because it's really easy. Like every parentheses has like parentheses within it. It could, but if there are any questions about any of those, I'd be happy to dive in deeper.
No, that's because you've had so many interesting experiences. I'm sure our audience has a lot of questions for you later. So Yannick, so since meeting the event organizer, you've remained active in the Japan-Africa space. Can we hear a little bit more about what keeps you going? And what's next? What's next for Yannick?
Like I said, so now I'm really focused on startups, the startup ecosystems in Africa. And the reason behind that is because, there are a lot of, when you look at Japan's relationship with Africa, a lot of it is ODA, official development aid, which is mostly dispensed by JICA. There's also a lot of political, the relationships between governments and governments, which are going great. But if you look at private sector engagement, that's still relatively low. And what's happening right now is that the Japanese government is thinking about new ways of how to use their ODA and actually looking at entrepreneurship as a way to lead to development, and I think it's a great way to look at it. And it's also the same reason why I'm into what I'm doing, is because when you build infrastructure, schools, these, which are very important things, well, sometimes, these projects are a little opaque, especially when it's, government projects, even though there's tendering and all that. Some of them are very opaque, and the impacts also aren't necessarily as immediate as you would think, even though they're essential. But when you work with startup founders in Africa, you see the direct impact. Well, first of all, you're ticking so many boxes at the same time. You're addressing employment, you're addressing youth employment at that. Many founders are actually women, because women in many parts of Africa are the business-minded, trying not to say gender, but for lack of a better word. And the impact, and usually these startups are addressing critical issues in their markets. And so you're ticking so many boxes, and it's really easy to, and that's why you have a lot of actually impact funds that are interested in Africa, because it's an easy way for them to get their social impact points, if you will. But in terms of development, working with startups is a great way to actually see the impacts. And rather than having projects being funneled through governments, it's really directly to the people. And it's private sector as well. So that part is lacking when it comes to Japan-Africa relations. So many reasons for me to get involved into that. So I'm going to still stay in that space. So right now, we started our first acceleration program in Kenya, as I mentioned previously. We're at a second cohort already. And so we're going to do a third cohort, and probably the fourth cohort will be in another part of Africa, depending on many decisions, maturity of the market, whether we want to go to more mature markets like Nigeria, Egypt, or if we want to focus on least developed ecosystems like in Liberia or other countries like that. And but that's a space I really want to stay in, and I'm very excited to be part of this project, where I'm actually able to interact with some of these founders in Africa and see how amazing it is, how they're trying to change the world around them through these services that they want to offer, whether it's in mobility, healthcare, energy, you name it. They're founders, and it's so interesting to actually go there, because theoretically we can all imagine when you see, oh, this is a fintech startup and they're trying to get involved in mobile payments. You're like, okay, I get it. I get the concept. When you actually go there and see how the service is being used and how transformative it is, it reinforces, this idea that you have that, okay, this is really changing things. I was in Nairobi last week, and I was using cash, because in Africa, people say, well, you have to hold cash because, not many people use cards and stuff like, it's kind of like Japan before COVID, I would say, because now in Japan, there's some kind of uptake of cashless payments. But I went to a supermarket and I paid in cash, and they were looking at me like, why are you giving this to me? Like, everyone uses their phone to pay for their groceries, and here you're giving me this bill. So I felt like a dinosaur. But when you see that, you really understand, okay, this is why these fintech companies in Africa have these crazy valuations, because people are actually using them. It's not like Bitcoin where you're like, okay, it's a currency. Really? I mean, I still haven't purchased a Big Mac with a Bitcoin. Until I see Bitcoin available at McDonald's, that doesn't mean it's real to me. It's not a currency. It's an asset. It's not a currency. So when you go to Kenya and you see all these services being used, you understand that it's real and that the change is real. And mobile money is being used everywhere, in buses, taxis, supermarkets. So yeah, so that's probably what's next for me, kind of to deepen my footprint in that startup ecosystem and see how it's evolving in Africa, and better connecting these ecosystems to Japanese investors, whether it's VCs, CVCs, and try to basically connect some of these investors with international investors so that they can invest together in Africa, because trilateral investment is something that Japan is really pushing for, especially when it comes to Africa. So yeah, that's about it.
That's really exciting. Thank you so much for sharing, Yannick. I like what you said about like business sort of being a form of social innovation too, that we don't necessarily give enough thought to. And yeah, just hearing your stories about networking, asking yourself the right questions, your passion for the Japan-Africa space really shines through, and we're very excited for what's up next for you.
Yeah,
So
thank you so much.
thank you so much for joining us for today's talk. Seems like there are many, many more meaningful questions that we can explore, and I'm sure our audience has a bunch for you too. Well, actually, speaking of questions, Richard.
Okay, so it looks like we have about 20 something people. So we're going to ask some questions related to Yannick's story and to Africa. 5 questions here. And you'll have 20 seconds to respond each. So I think we're ready to go. Press my bars, press enter to start countdown. All right, 24 people in. All right, so the sooner you answer, the fastest, the more points you'll get. So this is the first question. From which video game did Yannick start learning Japanese? We have Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, Captain Tsubasa 3, The Kaiser's Challenge, Dragon Quest V, Hand of the Heavenly Bride, Final Fantasy VI, Advance. So let's see. Oh, wait a second. How did everyone get that?
Ooh, yeah, they're paying attention. I think I mentioned that once, like
Did mention it. Okay.
in
Okay.
passing. Yeah.
And what's the characteristic of Captain Tsubasa?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it was a sports game, and unlike any sports games which are direct action, this one was a command based. And like I said, there was no kanji, there was just katakana, hiragana, and just like commands. And so you can really see the action of the player and the command. So whenever it was like pass, like you would see the character pass. So it was kind of like cue cards, really. So I think that allowed me to kind of figure out hiragana and katakana, and that gave me a huge leg up, by the way. When I started officially learning Japanese in university, the professor was like, how can you read this? Like, this is our first lesson. I was like, yeah, I studied. So yeah.
Captain Tsubasa, right?
Yeah.
That was 1992, by the way, Tecmo for the Super NES. I remember I sometimes cycle past the Tecmo office. I think it's in Kudanshita, that area.
Right.
All right.
Those days are long gone.
All right. So question number 2. First we have our results here. Looks like Maverick.
Wow.
Listening carefully and fast on the draw. All right. So question number 2. Let's see if I can get this to advance. All right. Here we go. 20 seconds again. Where is the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD, 2022 going to be held? So I don't think you gave any hints for this one, did you?
Not that I can. No, I don't think so.
Just see people's con. Couple people.
Right. Yeah. Some people got it right. Some people are informed.
So is this the event that you described where all the imperial family and all the embassies had booths?
No, actually, no, that was that was Imano Africa. So TICAD is kind of the biggest expression of the Japanese government foreign policy towards Africa. So it started in 1993, and it used to be held every 5 years, and now it's held every 3 years. And they started alternating between Africa and Japan as hosts. I think about 6 years ago. I think TICAD 6 was the first time held in Africa was in Nairobi. Then it came to Yokohama. Now it's going to be in Tunis, and then might be Kobe. The next cycle, but yeah.
Right. Cool. That is amazing that it was held right outside the IUC.
Yeah. During my year, like that was amazing because it was almost like destiny. I don't know how to.
Great. Okay. Question number 3, a bit different topic. Nigerian startup Flutterwave was valued at over 1 billion, making it a unicorn. What is Flutterwave's ambition? Empower businesses through global payments, increase data to Africa through subsea cable, catalog genomic diversity for precision medicine, or drive distributed renewable energy?
That's a tough one.
Oh, looks like most people were paying attention again. I think you gave one example of payments there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Even though Flutterwave is really used in Kenya, it's a service called M-Pesa, kind of controls the market. But yeah, but these fintechs are just, I mean, sometimes I think it's a bubble, to be quite honest, because there's so many popping up, but they are clear leaders in the market that people are using. So that's reassuring.
Yeah. You told us the genomic diversity was an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's this a startup called Gene 54, and what they're doing is they work with pharmaceutical companies because, as you know, they develop drugs doing clinical trials, and usually during these trials they have like a sample group or a test group, and there are rarely Africans or Black people in these test groups, so that when these medications get shipped to Africa, sometimes some side effects aren't accounted for. So what Gene 54 is doing is that they're providing genomic samples and actually genetic data to these pharmaceutical companies to allow them to also consider African genomics when it comes to developing vaccines, whatever kind of medication.
Cool. The other 2 examples are also real examples. Zola Electric, I think, was the distributed renewable company. Okay, a little bit of a change of pace here. According to a 2020 JETRO report on Japanese investment in Africa, which is the top risk perceived by Japanese investors in Africa? Financial and currency, political and social instability, regulatory and legal, employment and labor risk. So this is an annual report, so you can see the trends. Interesting. I think we got them.
Very interesting. But I think that was kind of what we expected as an outcome because of the perception that this is being portrayed about Africa, the wars and all that stuff. Not to say there isn't a political stability, but if you really look at the continent, there's more peace than war. And of course and it's really when it comes down to regulatory and legal and the environment when it comes to business, essentially making sure that, if you invest, the government doesn't have the right to just take your money or just shut down your company. So those are the main concerns, at least for the informed business people who are considering doing business in Africa. So
according to this, we'll share these links later for those who are interested. According to this report, all 4 of these risks saw improvements of 15 to 20% compared to 2018. So it seems like the graph is really trending down in terms of, hesitancy to invest in Africa, which I think is great. Okay. Is this our last question? Oh, we skipped the last.
Wow.
Oh,
a clear leader here.
Well done. I think I wasn't waiting for Menti to work its magic, so we skipped the leaderboard until now. Sorry, everyone. Not sure why it's not reacting. Okay, here we go. Okay, last question. Bit of a change of pace. Which African fashion designer created the Olympics uniforms for their home country? Imane Ayisi from Cameroon, Christy Brown from Ghana, Telfar from Liberia, or Orange Culture from Nigeria? There is a hint in there somewhere. I don't expect everyone to know these brands. Ah, okay, only 2.
All right. Yeah, still got forgot the right answer, but it was a tough one because you have to know what Liberia's flag is and all that.
The red, white, and blue was there. Yeah, very cool. I think there's an article in the New York Times that talked about this designer Telfar. He's actually based in New York. I think born in New York as well, even though he's Liberian. But anyway, you said there's a trend of Afrofuturism. Is that what it's called?
Yes, there's this trend where we're starting to be more forward-looking when we think about Africa. The traditions are very, very important, but really trying to fuse that with a vision of Africa's future, and it kind of translates through some of these uniforms where they really look like superheroes taken out of Black Panther, pretty much. And that's part of kind of Afrofuturism, one aspect of it at least.
Cool. Very exciting. Yeah, those robes are really, really awesome. We'll send a link around if you want to check them out. Okay, so let's see who came out on top. Oh, Seiji-san. Bravo. Actually, Seiji-san is
Seiji.
He's possibly the only other fellow African in the audience. So maybe Seiji later you can talk to Yannick, or if you want to turn on your camera and say a word now, that's also fine.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry. I wanted to switch on my camera, but the thing that I'm not very presentable, so let me just switch on camera. So my name is Seiji. I'm a friend of Richard. We used to run together in Hong Kong. Was it that 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yep.
Yeah. So as he mentioned, I'm half African. I was born in Ivory Coast, grew up in Ivory Coast. I was there for 14 years, and then came in Japan, and I went to junior high school, university, and then now I'm working for a Japanese company. So what I'm doing basically is like I'm a project manager in a boutique investment bank. So I help Japanese buyers, companies to buy companies abroad. So basically cross-border M&A. Oh yeah, that's it.
Seiji-san, do you have any questions for Yannick?
Actually, I have a lot of questions, but I think I want to keep it, and probably I think I sent you an email in privately. So if you don't mind,
Okay.
yeah, thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. Well done on the quiz. Okay, so now I think we're going to proceed to Q&A, and I think Carlton has been collecting some questions.
All right, yes, we have a few questions real quick. Thank you all so much for sharing your questions with us. So first up, Yannick, the first question from Emily Butner. How did you approach formulating your career change plan? And what advice would you give to other alums looking to make such a career change?
Yeah, I took a lot of time actually working on, because I told it in a story. It's not like I just decided I'm gonna do this. I really thought long and hard about how this would happen, and there were so many aspects to it. Well, the first one was, well, there was a financial plan, obviously. You just don't quit your job to just do stuff. And so I had to think about the different types of revenue streams I was going to get, and you can have diverse revenue streams, whether you continue working part-time, whether you get like grants, loans, scholarships. So really thought about all that, and then pictured how it would play out over the next 3 years and how many resources would be required, looking at, housing costs, depending on where I wanted to go. So the financials were quite important. The second part was, as I mentioned previously, the odds. So like going at places where I knew I would be able to find my next step, because I didn't see everything from Montreal. I didn't see things happening 3 years ahead. I couldn't tell what was going to happen, but I knew that if I went to specific locations, that would unlock something. I didn't know what was happening after UBC. I had no idea. I would go to Yokohama. So I told myself, if I went to BC, knowing that it's the gateway to Pacific, I knew I would find somewhere. At least I would work hard at networking and finding someone who could take me to the next step. And same thing in Yokohama. I knew that once I was in Japan, I would start networking and be able to find someone who works in the space I want to work in. So it's about figuring out those different locations or degrees or institutions that will help you unlock the next step. So you don't have to see everything. You can still have like an approximate idea, but as long as you have like a North Star, like this is where I want to end up. It's not going to be a straightforward path. It's going to be full of zigzags, but at least you know, having that North Star was a crucial point in knowing what was the end result that I wanted and what was required for me to get there. You know, so and then kind of map that backwards. And so what else was there for the career change? I think, yeah, I'll say one thing though. It worked because I'd say I didn't have any kids. You know, if I had kids, the calculus would have been completely different. Maybe impossible, I couldn't tell, but or unless you have a partner who's really open to living abroad or living in other places. And there are ways for you to plan that as family. And matter of fact, when I was in UBC, there were families actually. So I had friends who came from Mexico with their entire family, wife and 2 kids, to study at the same program where I was. And they planned it out. You know, there was at UBC, there was family housing for people doing my program. So they looked into what would be, you know, required for their family to be all right, right? So. Yeah, so it's really, so basically the advice is like financials, think about that. And then, you know, what are the things that will help you unlock different pathways, you know, along the way, you know, and having this North Star, I guess. I'm happy to, you know, get into more specifics maybe after the Q&A if there's specific
Definitely.
questions that you're thinking about. So
Great, thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's really helpful and interesting.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Wonderful. Sorry, just to move along real quick. Next question. How long were you in Africa in your childhood? And have you encountered any barriers communicating with people in Africa because of, you know, stereotypes, biases, different values, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I moved to Africa when I was 6 years old. I thought I was American actually to that point because I was born in the States. Ronald Reagan was in power, you know. And so anyways, I everything was about living in America. Even James Brown had a song called Living in America. So when I moved back to Africa, I kind of realized that, hey, I'm actually African. And of course, you know, my mother being Chinese, I was being teased, you know, called Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee and all that stuff. But I've never encountered racism though. That's very different. And so I didn't encounter barriers of communication because people were very curious about, you know, who's this kid has a Chinese mother? We haven't seen that before. And some of my best friends my best friends come from that time when I was in Africa. So I stayed there from age 6 to 16, I think. So about 10 years, on and off between Ethiopia and Congo. And so those were pretty much formative years in terms of my identity. And because I haven't lived in Asia as much, you know, I would say spontaneously, I'm more familiar and identify more with the African side. I also identify with the Asian side, but I know that Africa has had a greater impact on me. And so, and also, because I didn't experience racism, that's an important part because I noticed that when I have friends who are also half African, half something else, and whenever they grew up outside of Africa, they're embarrassed of their African side first, or they try to at least you know, diminish how African they are sometimes. And that is something that we don't experience the other way. When you grow up in Africa, you're proud of being African, and you're not trying to shy away from it. And that's something is very characteristic, at least within my immediate circle of people who grew up in Africa. And so when I went to the West, I was more confident and knowing what Africa is and it's about. Whenever people were teasing me, didn't affect me because I knew it wasn't true, right? But if I were in France during my entire life and then people would tell me, oh, go back to your trees and bushes, like, I would think it's true and I would get deeply offended or embarrassed, but it wasn't the case. So I think I didn't encounter any barriers of communication in Africa. Maybe because also I was in Ethiopia, which is a special place in Africa because you have the African Union, the ECA, so the UN Commission for Africa. So you have African diversity in Ethiopia particularly is interesting because you have people from all over the continent working there. So I was able to meet people from Nigeria, Zambia, South Africa, you name it. And, and I've been exposed to diversity in that form. Even when it comes to religions too, like I was invited to Muslim celebrations and Jewish celebrations, and it was inclusive, not the way it's being celebrated today. For example, if you go like in the States, Jewish people have their celebrations and it's just a Jewish thing, right? And then Muslims have their celebrations, it's within that community, right? It's not inclusive. And I always found that strange because I didn't grow up that way. Like I was invited to all celebrations because they just wanted to share joy. It wasn't to convert us into anything. It was just, we celebrate, this is a happy moment for us. You are our friend, you're welcome. And that's it. So yeah, no particular barriers besides the Chinese thing and Jackie Chan stuff, which is very light.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Attorney Cowell, for that question. And then one more real quick here. So kind of similar to our first question about your life plan from Anthony Chan. Would you say you felt prepared for your role now because you had a purpose in mind, or were there still a lot of things within your new position that you had to adapt to?
Yeah, obviously a lot of things to adapt to. But I'd say that with my professional background, I was a lot more confident in terms of what I could and could not do. But even speaking Japanese wasn't enough, and my level of Japanese certainly isn't enough even to this day. But you have to adapt to, I think, Japanese business culture. I think one element that stuck with me was these meetings, right? Doing business in the West, usually meetings are pretty straightforward, and a lot of decisions are made during meetings. But in Japan, sometimes you have these meetings where it's just to gather information, or even the feedback that you get during meetings. People will nod and say, "Oh yeah, so this." So you think that they're kind of on board and they agree, but they don't. Either they don't understand what you're trying to do, or they don't agree with it, but they don't tell that to you. So then you kind of have to follow up and do that stuff. You waste a lot of time doing that. So I had to adapt to Japanese business culture, and that was a tough one. And also because it was a new field. I'm still, for example, I think bottom line is you have to maintain this learning attitude. The reason why I wanted to learn Japanese, I was open to learning new things. And to this day, I'm dealing with a lot of VCs and financial people. I'm not a financial expert, but I have to be curious enough to want to learn more about it and be open to it so that I can actually, engage with them. So I'm constantly adapting. I've never felt that, okay, I'm done. I'm here and I have nothing else to do and learn. Always keep learning and hopefully updating this firmware constantly, the same way you update your phone every day, is something you should try to maintain, I think, for the rest of your life, right? And language particularly, which is the journey of a lifetime, really, because you never really master language, I feel. So.
Understood. Thank you. It's definitely a lifelong journey, as you said. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for sharing your questions. Please, if you have anything else you'd like to discuss with Yannick, we'll be sticking around for a few more minutes afterwards, but I will pass the baton to Richard real quick.